And this is really one of, I think, the most interesting and fun times of our annual meetings. And we've been doing it for a number of years. And we profile some members of Generation 2 as part of our oral history project, continuing on forever. And my sister Nancy has been impressed in the service, where is she, to profile our wonderful grandparents. And just to, as she gets ready, Nancy put an email out to all the Stevens branch, and all of us had a chance to kind of think of our grandparents in different ways. And it's such a kaleidoscope of wonderful memories. And Nancy's task was to distill those memories into a few minutes.
Right.
Nancy,
I just want to start off with a picture, a darling picture of them, because many of you probably don't even know who they were, but they were the most fantastic grandparents. Did everybody get a chance to see this?
Yes, you put it on the mantle. Say who they are. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Ruth Stevens and Augustus Stevens. I'll get into his name in a minute. Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, that works.
When I was starting this project, I realized as a kid you don't often kind of figure out about your grandparents. You kind of take them for granted, and nobody knows how they met or where they got married, all this sort of stuff. So I decided to really concentrate a lot of my notes on these wonderful summers that we had here in Lake George. Now, Augustus was born in Arcadia, Nova Scotia on September 28, 1888. He was the last of many children, and at 17 he bolted for Boston when the apple crop failed, and he worked his way up in a brokerage firm and eventually moved to St. Louis, where he was extremely successful until the crash of '29. After that, Mother always proudly told me that he placed all of his staff in jobs before he himself found a job, and then he switched gears and became a successful insurance broker. Now the name Augustus is kind of an odd one, but he was named after Augusta, the midwife who delivered him safely to his mother, who was well into her 40s, which is kind of shocking in those days. As soon as he was established in Boston, he moved his mother, his beloved mother, and his two spinster sisters, Lizzie and Louie, to Brookline. And just a quick, they lived across the street from the McAleers, and that's where my mother and father met. But anyway, and Gramp was lovingly took care of them for years, even up here at the lake. He'd dutifully go down to the Boston area to visit them and see that they were all right. Granny went to Mary Institute and then finishing school at Lake Como in Italy. She was an avid gardener and an avid needlepointer, and she had gardens here in St. Louis that were all spring gardens, and her wonderful English garden over at the cottage. She had a special gardening dress that was made out of seersucker by her seamstress, Jane Gordon, and it had a double hem so that it wouldn't wear out at the knees, and she had white canvas shoes. I don't ever remember wearing trousers or shorts. And after a round of gardening, she would retire to her barwar chair, which we still have, which is this chair where the legs go up, but with her spectator pumps on. She took her canvas shoes off. Always had it to be just fine. When Gramp was in the chips before the market crash, they asked WKB if they could move a part of the old Mohican house across the lawn. WKB, who loved his dear Rufus, as he called her, absolutely agreed, and Granny and Gramp paid to add the bathrooms, there were none in this annex, the kitchen, the porches, and eventually a brick path was made so that great-grandfather could wheelchair across to the cottage to check on the activities of the four Stevens daughters who he adored. Gramp absolutely loved activity. He spent hours with us picking blueberries at Mr. Wells' pasture, took us on horseback rides, provided tennis lessons at the Lake George Club, arranged for picnics on Scroon River, where he bet us $1 if we could swim upstream, hosted many a bingo night at the club, took us to the Callett Theater when Bolton had a theater, and many other excursions, including filling most of the seats on the counter at Bill Gates' diner for a few cheeseburgers. And then when we were older, to the track in Saratoga. He bought us a sailfish. He hated it if the tennis court was empty or we were just sitting around. But at 6 o'clock, it was cocktail run-up time. And it was all kids off the porch. In those days, the McAleers and Lambus and some of the Weeds all lived in Fallen Arches. Sunday lunches was the joint of roast beef, which was the only protein we got right after the war, because we lived on the vegetables from the garden. It was a commanded event. We had to dress and sit through boring cocktails. And then we were served first, and we all sat outside. And then the grown-ups went inside, and then they shut all the windows to drown us out. To this day, I don't know how they survived in that dining room with no air and the heat. As kids, we always wondered how Granny was so pleasingly plump when she would eat a banana for lunch and like a bird for dinner. But one of us discovered her coming down the stairs chomping on a Heath bar. And it was then we knew her secret. She kept them in her lingerie, where she knew nobody would ever go back. We all look forward to a special invitation to join Granny and Gramp individually for dinner, spend the night on the west sleeping porch, and then have breakfast. Breakfasts were the most appalling production because they put into 2 sockets, a coffee maker, a tea maker, a toaster, an egg poacher, and this is before surge protectors. And then Gramp would retire with the Wall Street Journal, and Granny would spend most of the days in the garden. Gramp paid us a penny a fish to catch fish for fertilizing Granny's garden, and he raged over the Japanese beetles that attacked Granny's roses, and with great relish dumped him into a bucket of kerosene. To get rid of the flies, he installed Big Stinky on the clothesline at the back of the cottage. A dead fish was put in this Big Stinky to attract flies and blast maggots, and the stink was unbelievable. Granny had a philanthropic side. Every summer, she would get the card table out with stacks and stacks of envelopes and letters to send out appeals for the Bolton Health and for Dome Island, which was then a privately owned island. Granny had a wicked sense of humor. One of her great sayings was, "You can lead a horticulture, but you can't make her think." Gramp would get very nervous and get it when she got it. She had these sparkling blue eyes, and she'd get a twinkle in her eye, and he knew something risque was coming, and he would say, "Ruth, prenez garde the grandchildren." Granny was extremely generous with gifts, and every Christmas and every birthday was a book picked out just for each one of us. My father reported being in St. Louis just before Christmas to find the guest room awash with presents for her 16 grandchildren. On August 1, she loved joining the ladies on a no-good while the gents were off fishing, and we'd check out a few antique stores and then hit the McMullen factory store where she bought us all matching linen outfits. She was delighted that she saved so much money until Gramp jokingly asked her to show the cash. You know, how much did you really save? I want to see the cash. Gramp's 4 daughters absolutely adored him, and to their dying days, they always referred to him as Daddy. He was so proud of his daughters, his sons-in-laws, and his grandchildren. They were the best grandparents ever. They instilled in all of us a love of views, activity, good food, blueberries, gardens, family, a Mohican Point, and so much more.